In our program, Eternal Life Answers from Science, today it is a great source of satisfaction for me to be able to present my dear friend Álex Gómez-Marín. He is a physicist, a theoretical physicist, and a neuroscientist. My friend Álex, thank you very much for having accepted this invitation. It holds a truly significant importance for me, especially within the overall content of my message. Thank you again, my friend Álex. Álex Gómez-Marín is a physicist, a theoretical physicist, and a neuroscientist. His research focuses on the study of the human mind in the real world, including what he calls the margins of consciousness, a strange and wonderful field where enigma often meets stigma. Álex holds a PhD in theoretical physics from the University of Barcelona. He was a postdoctoral researcher at the Center for Genomic Regulation at the Champalimaud Center for the Unknown in Lisbon. Since 2016, he's been a principal investigator at the Institute of Neurosciences of Alicante. Currently, he is an associate professor at the Spanish National Research Council and also serves as the director of the Pari Center located in the region of Tuscany, Italy. This center is dedicated to the exploration of the intersection between science, art, and the sacred. In 2021, he went through a profound near-death experience, and ever since that time, he has been diligently working to integrate it into both his personal life and his professional career. My dear friend Álex, once again, a truly heartfelt thank you for having accepted this invitation. The medical education we receive at the Faculty of Medicine is founded upon the Cartesian and Newtonian scientific method, the very method I taught my students at the Faculty of Medicine and Dentistry of the University of Barcelona, located on the Bellvitge campus, and also to my residents within the surgery department. The Cartesian scientific method studies the macroscopic objective world and is fundamentally based upon a materialist ontology which incorporates dualism, locality, continuity in movement, and a clear determinism. Based on these principles, the structural vision of the human being, according to the Cartesian-Newtonian method, allows us to define it as a body, which is matter, and a mind, encompassing all mental, psychic, memory, consciousness, emotions, and feelings. And from the perspective of the scientific method, all mental activity is considered an epiphenomenon of matter, meaning that it is secondary to metabolic activity, to the biochemical reactions that occur within our neurons. With this objective in mind, Descartes himself defined life as I think, therefore I am. Therefore, on the Shishantos, the Nishapoka. But this also leads to the consequence of physical death, which by the second law of thermodynamics, where everything has a tendency towards disorder, towards entropy, implies death, cellular disorganization, and cellular death. Therefore, our thoughts come to an end. As a consequence, we cease to exist. According to the scientific method, physical death signifies the end of our existence. Throughout my professional career, I have cared for patients diagnosed with clinical death from various causes. In the surgical field, the most common causes are often traumas, severe hemorrhages, acute anemia conditions, septic shock, anaphylactic shock, and even complications arising from very complex perioperative surgeries. These patients, when applying the currently well-protocolized cardiopulmonary resuscitation measures, we managed to recover some of these patients in the first minute, up to 33. My surprise was that some of these patients we revived from clinical death, objectively confirmed by a flat electrocardiogram and a flat electroencephalogram after 15-20 seconds, reported a series of experiences and perceptions that coincided exactly with the time interval during which they were clinically dead. This, logically, went totally against my principles of the Cartesian and Newtonian scientific method. These experiences and occurrences that we define as near-death experiences, very well defined by Bruce Grayson, a professor of psychiatry at the University of Virginia, who describes them as subjective, profound experiences possessing a transcendent component which present themselves in patients in a dying state, approaching a definitive conclusion, and that are manifested as an out-of-body experience and which transcend the boundaries of space, time, and the ego. These experiences, or near-death experiences, from a scientific method standpoint, have no justification. The very first question I asked myself regarding this phenomenon was, how can it possibly be that from some biochemical reactions occurring deep inside our neurons, which are essentially just molecules, in other words, purely material particles, from the reaction of physical particles, give us in the first place some psychic manifestations that have no material substrate, but are, for example, memory, consciousness, feelings, thoughts, and memories. I have no scientific reason for this phenomenon. I'm lucky today to have a neuroscientist here, and the first thing I'll ask my friend Álex is, as an expert neuroscientist, is there any scientific explanation that can justify for us, with any demonstrated theory, that biochemical reactions of material molecules within neurons produce psychic phenomena without material substrate, thought, memory, consciousness, etc.?
Is there one?
Thank you. Glad to be here. Thanks for the invite.
Thanks, my friend Álex.
Perhaps one way to answer this question is to, I like to go back to the very beginning of science, or what we now call science or the scientific method. This truly marvelous, incredible, and highly successful way of understanding reality itself that was established 400 years ago, thanks to Galileo. And Galileo did one thing, well, he said many things foundational to understanding science, right? That have to do with the mathematization of reality with experiments, but he also made a separation. And I like to tell it this way. He says something like, in nature, there are two types of things, some that travel in first class and others that travel in second class. What does this mean? That what can be measured and quantified most easily, that's what science will study first. And from that point, there emerged the fields of astronomy, mechanics, physics, biology, and chemistry. And he put aside for later what truly matters most to us as humans: love, pain, the senses. He left it for later, and I believe that we simply forgot about it. And 400 years later, in fact, in the 90s, that's when consciousness began to be studied in laboratories. And throughout this whole journey, science has mixed with materialism, which is a philosophical ideology. And often we think that one thing is the same, that if you do science, you have to be a materialist. But there are other philosophical options, other worldviews in which these phenomena that we are studying and that interest us so much are possible. Whereas if we pursue Cartesian materialist science, the mere penis, all these phenomena have no place whatsoever. And that is why we must first dismantle this ideology so that at least these phenomena can be possible. And then we'll see how we can study them, how we can understand them, and how we can explain them.
It's perfectly clear. I understand it perfectly that with a purely materialistic view, it has no justification, but separating from that philosophical point of view, it does. Friend Álex, you had a near-death experience. I'm very interested in having a neuroscientist and theoretical physicist tell us about a real near-death experience. Your account is sure to have implications that a person with without such profound scientific or physical knowledge could express. For this, I am infinitely grateful that you share your near-death experience.
It would be a pleasure and an honor to do it here. I have a peculiarity, but it's very simple. I am a theoretical physicist, a neuroscientist who almost died. That's the only thing. And I was in the tunnel, I'll tell you about it now. And when I came back and recovered from the surgery and so on, well, first I tried to integrate that experience into my personal life. There's no other option. What does this mean for me, for my life now, for the future, for my daughters, and my relationship, and so on? But I also decided that I would try to integrate her professionally. And I believe that's the interesting dual perspective we can also discuss today, right? What does this experience tell me, not just as Álex, as a human being, but as someone who has been shaped, sometimes even misshaped, trained, and thoroughly instructed in physics and neuroscience? What does physics tell me, and what does neuroscience tell me about what I've experienced, right?
Well, if you want, I'll tell you the story.
Experience, please.
Also, today marks a curious anniversary. 4 years, not since the event, but since I went to the hospital. I went to the hospital for a stomach bleed. And, well, it's your specialty, obviously.
Yes, my specialty, exactly.
I had a bleed in my stomach. So I didn't know where the bleeding was coming from. I went to the emergency room, and for many days, 9 days, easily, the doctors were trying to figure out where it was coming from my entire digestive system, where the bleeding was originating. So I was slowly losing blood. I sometimes tell it like this: if you have a water leak in the bathroom, it's fine if you detect it within half an hour, but if you wait more than a week, that's what happened to me. I lost a lot of blood and kept losing my vitality. I fainted. On the first day I collapsed, they wouldn't let me get out of bed. In the 2 weeks I was hospitalized, I lost 13 kilos. I went through a transformation. When I talk about it, my voice always breaks. Well, I had 3 things happen to me. Do we have time for you to talk about them? One Thursday afternoon when I was alone, they moved me to a different wing of the hospital, to a room where I was alone. My wife was coming and going, poor thing, like crazy with the little ones, and I was completely alone. When I fell asleep, I noticed that my consciousness suddenly turned off and on. It was like this. I'd noticed that as I drifted off, the house's fuses would trip, and then I'd wake up startled because I realized I wasn't just falling asleep, but my mind was slipping away, you know? And scared, I'd call the nurses who would come and say, everything's fine, calm down. That was the first thing. The next thing that happened to me, which I've only told a few times, is that I had sometimes we call it a dream, but I truly believe it's a vision. It is a vision. I had a vision where there was a carnival, there were firefighters, everyone disappeared, and suddenly I found myself in an ancient village with a stone floor, and then giant animals appeared, 5 or 6 meters tall, hybrid animals. Imagine a giraffe with the head of a lion, a tiger with the head of a crocodile, and these animals had fire in their heads, a marvelous fire that would not burn. And they were walking and placing themselves on top of me without stepping on me with their big paws, and they would bend their heads and put them on top of my head, that fire. One by one, these animals passed by, placing their fire upon my head. And then they transformed into colorful flying carpets and flew off towards the mountains. That, funnily enough, I don't usually tell that story because people tell me, well, tell us about the near-death experience, the tunnel, which I'll also tell you about right now. It was very brief. But lately, since I've reflected on this, I believe that this, we call it a dream, I believe this vision was a kind of blessing. I don't know. And I think it has much more meaning than I gave it when it happened to me, right? Because, well, I think it has to do with consciousness. But, well, we can just say I had that dream vision immediately after that episode where I felt like I was fainting, and also before the near-death experience itself. And now the near-death experience, how's that going? Cinematically, it's told in 7 seconds. I'm in a tunnel, which is really a pit. I mean, I'm looking up, and up above, 3 figures are waiting for me. Against the light, I see them. I see their silhouettes. I know each one of them, I have no doubt. The light is yellow and very strong, and I, at that moment, know, and that is very important when I tell this, I don't think or believe that. I know I am certain that they are receiving me, and if I accept their help, I will die. I know it. And at the same time, and I've read this many times, I read it after I had mine, telepathically, the communication is telepathic, we could say. I don't speak with them, I sense and I feel and know what they are proposing and what I am feeling. I give them my thanks and I tell them that not yet. I decide to return, and at that moment, es que I'm calm. No, I'm not in absolute joy, but I'm very calm in that pit. I know what's going to happen, and I simply thank them and return. That is my near-death experience.
The patients I've attended who have had a near-death experience strongly emphasize certain aspects. First, they communicate with the beings they encounter during the near-death experience telepathically, that is, through telepathy. Secondly, they tell me or notify me that upon encountering familiar beings, they perfectly identify during the near-death experience. They communicate with them telepathically. Thirdly, they also tell me that their experiences move through time, but only in the current moment, in the present. That is to say, although some of them tell me they perceive their life as if it were a film, their past, present, and some have even spoken to me about the future. And they perceive everything as happening in the present, in the current moment. Another aspect that I've also been informed about is that they have no real connection to time and space. For example, if they want to be in the antipodes, there are documented cases that speak of the antipodes. Resuscitated patients in the United States spoke of what was happening at that moment in the antipodes. Just by thinking they want to be in the antipodes, they automatically find themselves there. This means there's a transfer of information of possibility independent of space and time. And another aspect they also speak about is the moment of returning. The vast majority of patients that I have experienced do not wish to return. The situation is so pleasant, filled with such well-being, harmony, and love, that they prefer to remain in that state. However, I have encountered others, including a doctor, who voluntarily wished to return. He said he wanted to return, with the precise feeling of what you were recounting. If they cross a certain barrier, a level, or something they become aware of, they cannot return. So they are fully aware and do not accept remaining definitively in the other dimension. So they return voluntarily. You have experienced these aspects, and I would also like to know if you could tell me, did you identify the three people or the three images that you saw? Because they insist that they recognize them perfectly.
Yes.
Did you experience all these aspects?
Not all, some do. For example, I didn't have a life review. We know, right? Those of us in this field know about the Bruce Grayson scale, the Grayson scale.
Correct. Of the 16 items.
Exactly. And you can mark them.
Correct.
Mine, and sometimes I joke, would be a light near-death experience. There are others that are very complete.
Light. You have it whole in part.
Yes. Also, it's important to note that I wasn't in cardiac arrest, which is something people need to understand. I think you don't necessarily have to be clinically dead. These are fascinating cases for scientific study, a whole constellation of them. Even I have encountered cases of pregnant women giving birth who at that moment leave their bodies. I mean, there's a very broad phenomenology, right? Well, going back to the question, yes, there are aspects that I have also experienced and others that I haven't. I also share what you say, and it must be said very clearly, I believe, to everyone. What is experienced there is, it's not just real, it's hyper-real. What's lived is hyperreal. Yes, it's not comparable to a dream. Yes, we call it a dream because, yes, it's another state of consciousness, perhaps, and it's one we have at hand. To say, well, if it's not waking, it must be a dream. But that reality is more real than actual reality. For those who haven't experienced it, they'll have to believe it for the moment or place it in a box of skepticism that we can later try to address. Well, to clarify or help people truly understand if they haven't lived it themselves. More things to say. Well, about these figures. I don't usually share who they are, though in private I do say, but we could, to start, they weren't family, which is often thought. They don't have contact with their families. It's quite common.
Very common. Exactly so.
I would call them spiritual guides. They were three spiritual guides, very familiar and very well known to me. I wasn't surprised then, but I was later thinking about it, I said, wow. If that's the welcome for whatever comes next, what a lovely welcome. I hope, as we talked the other night at dinner, that they'll be there when I die, truly, to welcome me. I mean, it was such a beautiful thing to say. Wow. These guides, these avatars, these incredibly special people are here for me. How absolutely wonderful. One more thing I would like to add is that, and I want to thank you for your work and for your message. And it's because enough is enough, and here my activist side comes out, right? Enough of people being called crazy or stupid for having had and shared these experiences. And that's one of the reasons why I'm telling it. Because it seems that if someone deeply involved in science and they've experienced that and I tell the story, I feel you do the same thing on a much larger scale, don't you? To give a voice so that people can have a say. To tell people, if this has happened to you, you're not crazy and you're not stupid. And it's enough that science communicators or anyone else tell people what they can and cannot feel or experience. Enough of that. Especially when it's something so wonderful and so transformative, because that also transforms your life.
I am so incredibly grateful for these words because coming from you, they carry extraordinary weight. They lend a real substance to to our message, to everything you are saying, helping people truly understand that those who have had this experience are neither crazy, nor are they experiencing hallucinations. There are cases, in world history where people, for repeatedly sharing their near-death experience, have been diagnosed as psychopaths and received psychiatric treatment. Out of fear, people. I believe we can greatly help open this door of understanding for all humanity that this is a phenomenon that is very evident. There are thousands of documented cases, and it is a reality within the human species. There's no need to be afraid. It's normal that this can happen to us.
If you'll permit me, the real novelty, is that science has decided to start studying them. This year marks 50 years since Raymond Moody's book was published.
Correct.
It's like the starting gun for the scientific study of near-death experiences, but they've always existed. All traditions contain them in their teachings, in their stories. The novelty is simply that now science, a part of it, has decided to study them. And it's thanks to, I insist, people like you and many other pioneers like Bruce Grayson, Raymond Moody, Pim van Lommel, etc., who, having that position of authority as doctors, have been humble enough to listen to what their patients had to say. Two things are happening here, two phenomena, briefly. One is there technology to resurrect people? Technology advances and people can be resurrected. Point number one. And second, the doctor is willing to hear the stories. And if you hadn't listened, this wouldn't be happening. So thank you again.
You are very kind to me, Annette. Thank you. Initially, I spoke with neurologists, with psychiatrists, psychologists. Logically, they are doctors and have the Cartesian training as I did. Automatically, they replied to me, "Don't worry. These are hallucinations as a consequence of neuronal suffering due to lack of irrigation." Compadre, we know that neurons are very sensitive to a lack of cerebral blood flow. They are hallucinations. So what I did was examine the characteristics of near-death experiences and the characteristics of a hallucination. I see that they don't match at all. Experience has a logical structure. Hallucination is absurd. Patients remember the experience for life. Hallucinations are forgotten. They want no part of them. A near-death experience causes a significant psychological impact, but a hallucination, none. Do you agree they are two clinically distinct entities with no connection at all?
This is not my specialty, but from what I've read and the professionals I've spoken with, it seemed they are very clear that this is not so easily classifiable as just a hallucination. Here's the problem: we return to materialism. And it's okay. We can look. If we consider it as a hypothesis, it's all good. What do I mean by this? For many years, materialist scientists have told us, we know it's not. And now what's happening is that we've turned these words around, and now we say, we don't know and we want to know more. That's a spectacular change. What's happening? When you're discussing with someone who knows a lot about the brain, but whose ideology is materialistic in that operating system in Windows 95, for those of us who are a little older, right? You can't install the software for something that goes beyond the brain to be happening. For the mind to go beyond the skull, to leave the brain, it is inconceivable. So I think a good starting point is, we don't know if we'll investigate further and be able to do what you mentioned, right? We'll be able to rule out hypotheses. Hallucination, it seems not. So what's left then?
And we will keep moving forward, but always from a place of, from a healthy ignorance, from not starting from a dogmatism where the answer is already known, which is what happens many times. And the answer, I insist, for those who believe, because it's their belief that the universe is just matter, and that the mind, as you mentioned at the beginning, consciousness is an epiphenomenon. Well, for these people, when the brain shuts down, the mind shuts down, and that's it. There's nothing more to investigate.
Anche por dos que, y eso, estimados, I think the only thing we ask is, well, let's put this on the table and present it as a hypothesis, but there are other hypotheses worth investigating.
I also wanted to mention the following. In experiences of cancer leading to death, I've seen two types of phenomena, some that are objectifiable and others that are transcendent, which logically we cannot, with the usual Cartesian and Newtonian method, evidence or demonstrate. Regarding those that are clearly evident, which we can objectify, I've had, for example, some truly spectacular experiences with patients who, during the clinical death I was reviving them from, told me exactly everything that was happening in the department, for example, in the emergency room, in each of its areas, which I later verified and can certify is true. A patient who knew us, recognized us, then went into clinical death. He identified by name and surname the whole team that was resuscitating her. So I have several proofs. Another current study that neuroradiologists are also carrying out, which involves the practice of functional magnetic resonance imaging on patients who had a near-death experience quite some time ago. So they ask them to express or recount their entire experience with all the details while the magnetic resonance imaging is being performed. It's been observed that when they mention an object that caught their attention, one they'd never seen before or since, only during their near-death experience, and it sparked their interest, meaning it created a memory. They have a memory. When they describe and recount it during an MRI, the occipital lobe activates. The same neurologists who opposed the acceptance of the near-death experience were surprised and told me, this patient has memory of this object, mirror neurons are involved here. And they end by telling me, this patient really saw the object and isn't lying. So I tell them, how can that be if I have him clinically dead and I'm resuscitating him and this object is far away and you assure me? They say, I can only assure you that he really saw the object. So we have an increasing number of objective proofs that allow us to say this is real. It's not an invention, a dream, or a hallucination. Now we move on to the chapter, let's say not controversial, but harder to prove.
Sure.
These are the transcendent phenomena. For example, they tell me they saw a deceased relative. I don't know if he has seen it, if they've seen a light, if they've seen their life. I cannot objectify any of this. So, here comes the problem. If from the point of view of the scientific method it's impossible to demonstrate this, then what I did is I took one more step and entered another discipline. The scientific method studies what is objective, what is macroscopic. But then we enter a microscopic world, which is, of course, theoretical physics, quantum mechanics, and quantum theory. And here I am truly, truly satisfied to have a theoretical physicist, a quantum expert right here by my side. I'm not a theoretical physicist, I'm an amateur. I've read things, I've taken a course, but naturally my knowledge is rudimentary. And perhaps I've said something at some point that might actually be debatable. I accept that, and I'm always willing, I repeat, to change it if an expert demonstrates it to me. So I wanted to ask you, when entering the world of quantum physics, the first thing that truly strikes me, that truly grabs my attention, is that the structural concept of the universe changes completely. Macroscopically, we've called it a materialist ontology, but when we enter the quantum, we must speak of a structural element, energy. Energy is neither created nor destroyed. It transforms, potential, kinetic, thermal, electromagnetic, whatever you want. And thirdly, it's in a constant state of vibration, waves and electromagnetic waves propagate. As an expert, would you agree to add anything else regarding the structural concept? We go from macroscopic objectifiable matter to a world we can no longer objectify. We're going to study some particles, atoms that we don't see. We'll study their effects, their interactions, and express them with mathematical formulas. Mathematics is the language of theoretical physics. Are you in total agreement with these aspects I've read and been told about, which, I repeat, I'm no expert in?
Let's get to it. Let's get to it. But first, I love this rhythm. If you don't mind, can we take a small step back? Because I want to say a couple of things about
You have free reign.
near-death experiences,
I want to get your best.
benchmarks, and we'll get into quantum. I'm not a quantum physics expert. I'm a theoretical physicist. My doctorate's in theoretical physics. I had a great professor of quantum physics, quantum mechanics, high energy physics at the University of Barcelona, Jose Ignacio Latorre, a true master. And we'll talk about quantum in a moment. But first, you said something very important that I want to highlight before we try to find an explanation, which I understand is where you
Go.
you see quantum to find a
Something to explain these profound things.
But before that, you said something very important, because you talked about how do we objectify? How do we study these experiences? And I want to remind you that, and you also said it's a problem. For scientists, a problem is a good thing. For people in our daily lives, a problem isn't good, but a problem is a gift, because the problem is what will make you go into the unknown. In other words, it's good news when things don't add up, because it means that when you solve why they don't, we'll learn a lot. This is the first thing to say. And the second is, and now to quantum, as I was telling you, Galileo made this, sometimes we can call it, I call it the fos de fos. And he said, the human soul for religion, and the movement of the stars and things in the terrestrial world for science.
For science.
So this separation of domains has worked very well for many centuries. And this screen, which I sometimes describe as a screen of success, science as an enterprise, right? A formidable business project that has conquered the physical, chemical, and biological, though life's secret isn't so hard to decipher. Psychology comes along, doesn't it? A little over 100 years ago, psychology decides it's going to study the psyche logos, that's the word, the soul.
The mind, the soul.
The mind, and with this soul consciousness, we often use these interchangeably, but as the saying goes, we'll just accept it for now. Let's just call them all the same for now. And when psychology decides to study the soul, the mind, it backs away and says, ugh, how do I measure this? How do I mathematize this? It won't allow it. The human soul won't. It won't allow itself to be measured and mathematized. And so this is my interpretation, and the psychologists I know agree with me. They look to Sumo Sol's cousin. Those of us who are old enough will remember the ad for Sumo Sol's cousin. He looks at Sumo Sol's cousin and asks, who is Sumo Sol's cousin? The theoretical physicist, right? Or the physicist. And what does she say? Measure and to mathematize. So psychology that wanted to study this reverses its stance, even denies its existence. It says the soul doesn't exist. And for many years, 20th century psychology was behaviorist. It studies behavior. Why? Because in behavior is what can be measured and mathematized. No, I tell you this because, of course, it's only in the 90s. In the 90s of the last century, 30 years ago, which in science is nothing. A Nobel laureate, Francis Crick,
Crick, yes.
and it grants the papal blessing to the scientific study of consciousness within orthodox laboratories. Therefore, we must consider the context. We have only been studying consciousness in a scientific manner for 30 years. And consciousness, I repeat, is that very thing which Galileo set aside for later, and we simply forgot. What do I want to tell you with this? That we don't know how it's done. Is I'm trying to explore a science 2.0. So why am I taking this detour? To get back to near-death experiences. Of course, the temptation, which is very understandable and we should pursue, is, well, let's put them in a brain scanner. Let's see what happens inside the brain. But the other element that can't be forgotten is the human experience at all times. I mean, a story a patient tells you, they might call it an anecdote. And in fact, many times it's called, well, it's just an anecdote. They tell you. But 2 stories, 10, 100, 500, 1,000 stories told by patients who don't know each other to people who are very well trained like you and other professionals, those are already scientific data. So it's very important that we don't forget. All this is to tell you that sometimes I'm a bit elliptical, and I insist that if we want to make a science of consciousness, human experience is our working material. It is our scientific data too. Not just what brain receptor, what brain circuit, what resonance.
Remember how I mentioned the first and second class before, right? The reality that travels in first class and the reality that travels in second class, which is the one of experiences. Now, all of them need to travel in first class. Therefore, the job is to unite the experiences with the measures that can be taken.
I see it clearly and I thank you. I love it.
Before we jump into the explanation, so for now, the data we work with is what our brain scanners can measure and what people tell us, and that's sacred. It's sacred to listen to it and sacred to consider it, treating it as scientific data too, because it's the experience we want to understand. All right, now let's move to quantum.
What I told you at first, the structural element, Ashkia, do you agree we should discuss energy, particles, atoms, subatomic particles, and these properties of vibrational states, electromagnetic waves, etc.? This as a basic principle, that is, we must change our paradigm. From what is matter, we transition to something we cannot perceive. We have to study its effects, its interactions, and then express it using mathematical formulas. This is our starting point, so to speak.
It's a starting point, radical, disruptive. It happened 100 years ago, and we're still figuring out what this means. Paradigms rarely change, but when they do, it's a huge experience. Think about it. Almost at a civilizational level, quantum physics arrived 100 years ago, 100 plus years, right? And we're still processing what this change in our worldview truly means. That's why quantum physics is so wonderful and so mysterious. How can we possibly explain it? How can I explain what's happening in what was happening there? Let's start with an analogy. The materialists, whom I sometimes call material wits because they're so clever, would say everything is made of matter and there's nothing else. And everything else we talk about has to emerge from, right? We've seen this is very problematic for studying consciousness. You know, but they even believed everything was made of matter.
Let's think of this as liquid water. My apologies. I meant solid water.
Solid. But then we realized that matter transforms into energy and energy into matter, which is an incredible breakthrough, isn't it? When we grasp this in physics, right? Ori 105, Dari 1 kas. So, solid water can be made liquid, but we can go beyond energy. Many powerful theoretical physicists now say the universe is made not of matter or energy, but of information. So, let's think of it as gaseous water. So suddenly there are several states. There is matter, no doubt. There is energy, no doubt. And there is information. I think there are more things. So one of the first changes, and many changes happen at the beginning of the 20th century, is that we have to redefine not only the rules of the world, but what it's made of. And so, with relativity, it turns out that space, literally, the Cartesian squared, absolute space, will now deform according to the mass that is present, because mass and space are practically siblings in their very definition. It will turn out that time will run slower if we move faster, meaning the clock, also Cartesian, now it's going to expand. I mean, we have changed this definition of space, that of time, that of matter converts into energy, even information. What do we have left? Notice the change, we haven't talked about quantum yet, but the change in definition of what we took for granted is radical. And this is very important to remember, because we will also have to change our definition of death and our definition of consciousness. And that's perfectly fine. Now, what about quantum mechanics? I remember how they used to teach it to me at the university. These physicists start finding anomalies, which is the same thing that's happening to us in the sense that we have this data that don't fit into any framework. Near-death experiences, other margins of consciousness. In their case, it was something very curious. I don't want to elaborate too much, but well, you tell me, cut me off or redirect me, because this is fascinating.